from the great stimulating presentation by now I want to one of the key people that's dealing with intercultural dialogue and cultural diversity discourse across the world is all the state partners of UNESCO, Karalyn MONTEIL. And Karalyn, you see her bio on the website in your forms. But Karalyn has got also one of these rare people who just doesn't work from Paris. She worked in San Francisco, she worked in East Africa. She's somebody who's got one foot in the mainstream, if you allow me to say that, another foot in the field. And would you join me in welcoming back down to the next presentation?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for honoring me coming today and inviting me. Thank you to the host. Thank you, Amar. And my name is Karalyn MONTEIL, and I'm the head of our programs and stakeholder outreach in the Diversity of Cultural Expressions entity at UNESCO Headquarters in Paris. As Amar said, I've also been based in UNESCO's regional office for Eastern Africa in Nairobi, Kenya. I've worked since 2001 for UNESCO, and so thanks to this wonderful opportunity, I've gotten to learn a lot about our normative instruments and the actual implementation in our member states around the world. So I'm really happy to share that with you today in my presentation. So I'm particularly happy to talk about this year's theme on intersectionality, which has greatly inspired me for its relevance and its importance in protecting and promoting the diversity of cultural expressions, especially in museum education and outreach. As this topic is at the heart of UNESCO's work, I'm really pleased to share with you some reflections based on my current experience fostering freedom of artistic expression and cultural diversity, guided by UNESCO's standard-setting instruments and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. With 194 member states and 12 associate members, UNESCO is the only intergovernmental agency of the United Nations with a comprehensive mandate for culture. The preamble of our Constitution affirms that the wide diffusion of culture and the education of humanity for justice and liberty and peace are indispensable to the dignity of humanity. Our governing bodies are at the origin of a number of conventions, recommendations, and declarations, which form a body of international law that guide member states in creating stronger foundations to support the participatory and inclusive protection and promotion of culture in all its diversity. By learning more about UNESCO's programs and resources, I hope this will inspire you to strengthen our collective actions in favor of increased inclusion and intersectionality in museums. The term intersectionality is not new. It was coined in 1989 by civil rights advocate and scholar of critical race theory, Columbia and UCLA law professor Kimberly Crenshaw, to describe how different identities related to race, gender, social class, and others cannot be understood in silos, but intersect to create their own set of realities and challenges. And even if it's now been more than 30 years since Professor Crenshaw started these reflections, it's only in recent years that the concept has been mainstreamed to challenge the status quo in all spheres of society, bringing with it a number of both opportunities and backlashes. Indeed, detractors see intersectionality the will to further separate and divide. For many, it is easier not to see race or gender or class and address the whole of society as a homogeneous ensemble, where universal realities apply with the ideal in mind of erasing differences and magically creating unity. Yet despite the declared good intentions behind this approach, It pushes for a sort of universality to which only a small minority have the privilege to identify. Our world is rather filled with an infinite number of cultures and realities, and acknowledging this diversity is the best way to celebrate it and create social cohesion. For a long time, and for large segments of society, museums have been inaccessible or stagnant spaces, celebrating the cultural heritage of a privileged few, avoiding the realities of others, and presenting the artifacts in their collections as curiosities for the masses to see and understand through dominant perspectives. This created a situation where many people have thought and still think that museums are not for them. Spaces where they do not belong, spaces that they are rejected from or that contribute to their oppression. In recent years, however, the mainstreaming of reflections about intersectionality and social justice has stimulated a paradigm shift where visitors are no longer passively taking in what is presented to them, but protesting and demanding change, from the restitution of stolen artifacts to the representation and celebration of diverse cultures and realities. We can notably think of the case of Congolese activist Emery Mwazulu Diabanza, who in 2020 attempted to seize a funerary pole of Chadian origin at the Musée de Quai in Paris to denounce the cultural looting of Africa. UNESCO's 2003 Convention for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage addresses the practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, and skills, as well as the instruments, objects, artifacts, and cultural spaces associated with them that communities, groups, and in some cases, individuals recognize as part of their cultural heritage. The Intangible Cultural Heritage Convention calls for ensuring respect for the intangible cultural heritage of the communities, groups, and individuals concerned, and raising awareness at the local, national, and international level of the importance and mutual appreciation of the intangible cultural heritage, in particular of Indigenous populations. Museums have a significant role to play in applying the principles of this convention, and if museums wish to remain relevant today, it's long overdue that they answer this call in an inclusive manner, not only for or about, but with concerned communities. The 2003 convention calls for the widest possible participation of communities, groups, and individuals who create, maintain, and transmit such heritage, and to involve them actively in its management, its presentation, and its interpretation. In addition, the UNESCO 2015 recommendation concerning the protection and promotion of museums and collections, their diversity, and their role in society acknowledges that museums are more than places where objects are exhibited and conserved. Museums are platforms for debate and discussion, tackling complex societal issues and encouraging public participation. Museums can use their soft power to hold up a mirror to society, to introduce visitors to alternative visions of the world, and provide opportunities to foster creativity, imagination, and respect for self and others. They have the key mission to contribute to the wide diffusion of culture and the education of humanity for justice, liberty, and peace. In the same spirit, the UNESCO 2024 Global Framework for Culture and Arts Education calls for broadening the concept of learning environments by establishing more sustained cooperation with formal, non-formal, and informal learning spaces, such as specialized museums, galleries, performing arts venues, creative hubs, and other arts and culture spaces in both rural and urban areas. Learning in, through, and with culture and the arts can indeed develop a broad range of cognitive, social, emotional, and behavioral skills, and foster intercultural dialogue, cooperation, and understanding, which are critical to sustainably address global challenges and transformational processes. An interesting example of the educational role of museums can be found in the School Partnership for Art and Civic Engagement Learning Program created by the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. Through this program, resident artists relocate their studio practices into high schools, turning them into creative hubs for artistic and civic exchange, notably by co-designing and co-teaching an interdisciplinary, socially engaged curriculum. Another interesting example is the Costler Art Center in London, which helps prisoners and ex-offenders reintegrate into society by taking part in the arts. It also aims to challenge stigmas about ex-offenders. Already in 2015, when the UNESCO Museum recommendation was adopted, drafters put emphasis on this social role of museums. Paragraphs 16 and 17 of the recommendation indeed read that museums can help communities to face profound changes in society, including those leading to a rise in inequality and the breakdown of social ties. They should be places that are open to all and committed to physical and cultural access to all, including disadvantaged groups. They can constitute spaces for reflection and debate on historical, social, cultural, and scientific issues. As debates fostered by intersectionality are indeed pushing for profound changes in our societies and in our policies, museums have a leading role to play in hosting and nourishing these important discussions. An interesting example can be found at the Zeitz Museum of Contemporary Art Africa in Cape Town, which develops educational, discursive, and enrichment programs aimed at encouraging intercultural understanding and striving for access for all. In 2024 and 2025, the Zeitz MoCA is presenting the solo exhibition of film and sculpture, The Other Side of Now, by Vietnamese-American artist Tuan Andrew Nguyen, which explores colonialization and war, which explores colonialization and war, attending to the erased voices of Vietnamese, Senegalese, and Moroccan history, and proposing a space for communal healing and remembrance. The Zeitz MoCA exhibition is an interesting way of fostering important debates by giving space to what has been coined artvocacy, a term used to describe socially engaged art, art that challenges the status quo, or art that makes us think and react. Artvocacy amplifies the voices of artists who use their medium to take a stand, express dissent, or fight for change. It is also a means for museums to be change agents and guarantors of artistic freedom. Indeed, artists do not only produce work that appeals to the senses, their creations can also highlight issues, challenge norms, and encourage conversations driving sustainable development processes. Without artistic freedom, it is not only artists who are deprived of their means to survive, but also society as a whole that is missing out on opportunities to imagine alternative futures. As stated by Dia Kemp, filmmaker and UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador for Artistic Freedom and Creativity, some artists create to tell ugly truths about our society, to tell us about oppression, to expose injustices. Other artists create because they want some beauty in times of darkness. Art is there to challenge. Art is also there to heal. We must protect the rights of artists, promote them, and support them, and ensure that they continue to thrive and create freely. because art is not a luxury, it is a basic human necessity. UNESCO defines artistic freedom as the freedom to imagine, create, distribute diverse cultural expressions, free of government censorship, political interference, or the pressure of non-state actors. It includes the rights of all citizens to have access to these works, and it is essential for the well-being of societies. Artistic freedom embodies a bundle of rights protected under international law. These include the right to create without censorship or intimidation, the right to have artistic work supported, distributed, and remunerated, the right to freedom of movement, the right to freedom of association, the protection of social and economic rights, and the right to participate in cultural life. The integration of several human rights under the overarching notion of artistic freedom has been one of the UNESCO culture sector's main achievements. By framing this notion of artistic freedom, UNESCO has managed to bring the human rights framework closer to the specific challenges faced in the culture sector by artists and cultural professionals. The notion of artistic freedom is embodied in our UNESCO 2005 Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions. As presented in Article 2 on the guiding principles, the Convention states that cultural diversity can be protected and promoted only if human rights and fundamental freedoms, such as freedom of expression, information and communication, as well as the ability of individuals to choose cultural expressions, are guaranteed. Article 7.2 also recommends that state parties create an environment that encourages individuals and social groups to create, produce, disseminate, distribute, and have access to their own cultural expressions, paying due attention to the special circumstances and needs of women as well as various social groups, including persons belonging to minorities and indigenous peoples. Article 7.2 also mandates parties to strive to recognize the important contribution of artists and others involved in the creative process, cultural communities and organizations that support their work, and their central role in nurturing the diversity of cultural expressions. This vision of artistic freedom is also embedded within the UNESCO 1980 recommendation concerning the status of artists. The 1980 recommendation constitutes an important tool in helping states define who is an artist and recognizing them as having comparable legal, social, and economic rights to other workers, as well as recognizing their freedom of artistic expression. The recommendation works in conjunction with UNESCO's 2005 Convention, which defines measures to promote cultural expressions, including to create and disseminate work, and for artists to have their work supported. These instruments combine with international and regional human rights mechanisms to form a substantial body of international tools that promote and protect artistic freedom, and that states can draw on in the development of national policies and measures. As stated in the report by the United Nations Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights, artists are at particular risk, and their work depends on visibly engaging people in the public domain. Through their expressions and creations, artists often question our lives, perceptions of ourselves and others, our world visions, our relations, human nature and taboos, eliciting emotional as well as intellectual responses. As noted in the 2022 UNESCO Global Report, Reshaping Policies for Creativity, Addressing Culture as a Global Public Good, threats and attacks against artistic freedom are on the rise worldwide. Although this rise can be partly linked with the enhanced capacity of monitoring organizations such as Free Muse and others that regularly look at violations of artistic freedom, working in the instances of attacks are numerous and likely to be even higher than the registered numbers. Artists and cultural professionals' vulnerability increases in emergency settings, such as crises, conflicts, and disasters that tend to enhance efforts to limit any expression considered problematic. Though digital technologies represent new opportunities for artists, there's been an expansion of threats and attacks against artistic freedom taking place in the digital sphere, where artists have become more vulnerable to online censorship by state actors and internet companies. Artists are also victims of online harassment for the same motive as in the physical realm, such as for political or religious reasons. Laws are often used against artistic forms of expression through legal threats, the imposition of criminal offenses such as blasphemy, criminal defamation, and insult, or through disproportionate civil charges related to these legal figures. Moreover, vaguely defined laws give space for undue restrictions of artistic expression by reference to terrorism, national security, hate speech, public order, public morals, or traditional values. Censorship continues to represent an important challenge and has many indirect forms, such as withdrawal of funding, inclusion of artists on blacklists, as well as interference in the programming of cultural and arts institutions. Among responses to our UNESCO fifth global consultation on the implementation of our 1980 recommendation concerning the status of artists, which we carried out in 2022, there were references to structural racism and other prejudice, including homophobia, sexism, religious bigotry, and others, that contribute to vilifying, marginalizing, or suppressing certain types of artistic expression. This can also cause many artists to simply self-censor for fear of backlash. Recently, UN experts, including the UN Special Reporter in the field of cultural rights, published a statement on November 23, 2023, to express alarm at the worldwide wave of attacks, reprisals, criminalization, and sanctions against those who publicly express solidarity with victims of the ongoing conflict in Gaza. The experts pointed out that artists have faced particularly harsh consequences and reprisals from states and private actors because of their prominent roles and their visibility. They noted with deep concern that several artists around the world have been targeted because of their art or political messaging, pressured to change topics of artistic expression, and labeled as either troublemakers or as indifferent to the suffering of one side or the other. They declared that some artists have been deprogrammed and censored for calling for peace. Others have lost their jobs, and some artists have been silenced or silenced by their own cultural organizations and artistic communities. Museums have a key role to play in supporting artistic freedom by being mindful of direct or indirect forms of censorship, by being critical in their programming so as to become inclusive spaces where all artists can speak freely for the benefit of healthy societal debating, change, and representation. This means showcasing the work of a diversity of artists, including artists in emergency situations, providing the necessary background and educational information so their work is not taken out of context. This also means facilitating links between museums, galleries, cultural centers, and journalists. For instance, through the preparation of briefs in anticipation of controversies, which could allow journalists to report more accurately on the complexities of certain exhibitions and help audiences better understand the artist's work. This can help prevent instances in which media misrepresent artists' work, which lead to real consequences on artists, such as withdrawal of financial support, depriving artists from accessing spaces they need for performing, exhibiting, or rehearsing, given that the entities who would otherwise support them fear the reputational risk this entails. Recently, in the margins of the 2024 Biennale de Venezia, UNESCO supported the organization of an Artist at Risk Pavilion. We transformed our UNESCO office in Venice into an artist pavilion, and we commissioned the work of 17 artists from conflict zones to put on display during the Artist Biennale. We worked closely with the Finnish NGO Artists at Risk in order to honor artists and cultural professionals who risk their lives on the front lines of artistic freedom. In addition to supporting artists in conflict zones, participating artists and institutions at the Biennale de Venise also highlighted the need for cultural spaces and events to become inclusive of artists from state-lit communities such as the Roma. Museums have a key role to play in supporting artistic freedom by protecting everyone's right to participate in cultural life. As stated in the UNESCO Framework for Culture and Arts Education, ensuring access to culture and the arts is inseparable from the existence of spaces dedicated to it that are open and allow for participation of all, including museums, cultural and arts institutions, performance venues, libraries, heritage, and memorial sites. Access to culture is recognized as a cultural and human right by the United Nations and is monitored by the UN Special Reporter in the field of cultural rights. With the goal of promoting human rights and fundamental freedoms in the creative sectors, the UNESCO 2005 Convention calls for establishing monitoring systems to evaluate levels of representation, participation and access of women and marginalized groups in the culture and media sectors, and adopting measures to promote and protect freedom of creation and expression and participation in cultural life, notably in emergency situations where access to culture plays a key role in supporting the resilience and recovery of communities. Moreover, it's crucial to consider the rapidly changing landscape where the implication of digital technologies call for constant review of equality, diversity, and inclusion considerations. This new environment introduces a set of urgent fields to be considered by museums working digitally. These include being mindful of the works they disseminate on their websites and platforms, and addressing discoverability challenges in terms of accessing the diversity of cultural and artistic expressions online. The operational guidelines for implementation of the UNESCO 2005 Convention in the digital environment recall the principle of internet neutrality and calls for the promotion of equitable access and balance in the flow of cultural goods and services in the digital environment. In particular, through the application of preferential treatment provisions for works created or produced by artists and cultural professionals, entrepreneurs, and independent organizations from developing countries. An interesting initiative leveraging on digital technologies can be found in UNESCO's Virtual Museum of Stolen Cultural Objects, which aims to raise public awareness about the illicit trafficking of cultural property. Launching its first version in 2025, it will use advanced 3D and virtual reality technologies to create a global platform dedicated to stolen property. UNESCO member states are invited to select cultural objects of significant national heritage importance from Interpol's database or their own national database of stolen objects to contribute to this virtual museum. And unlike traditional museums, this museum aims to eventually empty its collections by returning stolen items to their rightful owners. It is in this context of all of these challenges that the Ministers of Culture of UNESCO member states adopted in 2022 the Montreal Declaration, which recognizes culture as a global public good and calls on the UN Secretary General to integrate culture as a specific goal in its own right in the Sustainable Development Agenda beyond 2030. In addition to calling for further investment in the educational and social goals of museums, they commit to a number of actions that are relevant to museum practitioners, such as fostering an enabling environment conducive to the respect and exercise of all human rights, and in particular, cultural rights, individual and collective, in all areas of culture, from cultural heritage to the cultural and creative sectors, including in the digital environment, in order to build a more just and equitable world. Reduce inequalities, including for women, youth, children, Indigenous people, people of African descent, persons with disabilities, and other vulnerable groups. This includes supporting inclusive access to culture and participation in cultural life and its benefits as an ethical, social, and economic imperative. The ministers also called on protecting and promoting artistic freedom and freedom of expression, protecting and fostering the diversity of cultural content, as well as linguistic diversity, upholding the rights of people and communities to their cultural identity and heritage, including the expression of cultures of Indigenous people, and expanding efforts to promote the protection, return, and restitution of cultural property, including in consultation with the populations concerned and with their free, prior, and informed consent. This includes for museums and private collectors to prevent the acquisition of unprovenance objects. UNESCO is organizing a follow-up to this 2022 Montreal Conference, which will take place next September in 2025 in Barcelona, Spain, where we will look at the progress made and new challenges to be faced, especially in relationship to peace building in the digital environment. To conclude, it is imperative for museums to respond to social impetus and cultural rights, and both adapt and contribute to constructive debates and actions around it. The need for intersectionality, which had long been ignored, is no longer an option, but a necessity. It includes giving space to Artvocacy, which should be welcomed and contextualized, notably in collaboration with the media sector, to both spark important debates and protect artists, their safety, their livelihoods, and their freedom of artistic expression. UNESCO stands ready to work closely with museum professionals and other cultural practitioners to protect and promote the diversity of cultural expressions in museum education and outreach as an essential requirement for sustainable development and for the benefit of present and future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karalyn. Thanks for celebrating cultural rights in museum discourse. And I think Barbara Charles is here. She probably knows who first said it in 1965. But request Julie and myself, several others, to use the expression museums are safe places for unsafe countries. And in some ways, you know, artistic freedom of expression is critical in museums in the way they provide safe places for others. Now we're going to take a shift about half an hour. Please introduce your name and where you come from before you ask the question. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Maya. I'm from Miami, Florida. Thank you so much for your talk just now. I had a question around your thoughts or any kind of advice you can give to institutions that are in spaces where some of the principles you talked about in welcoming for all maybe be at odds with the legislation of the police that you're in. This is something that I think is really kind of aspirational in practice, because it's very difficult to be in a space where you're creating programs and interpretive labels with your own liberal bias, and speaking about mine, in a space where you have people that are polarized in their political and religious, and in a state and community that has many different communities and perspectives, and negotiating tension when you really want to maintain a space of being a space of learning and neutrality to a certain degree. And when you live in an area of the world where words like climate change, sustainability, even the word hope is seen as being liberal. So if you could speak, that's a tough question.
It's a great question, and I'm definitely coming from Florida. I can imagine your pain with the critical race theory fans and others. Thank goodness for RuPaul. So I would say, from a UNESCO perspective, we're working with countries all over the globe, and a lot of people also ask us, oh, how can you be promoting freedom of expression with countries that are overtly, not respecting this freedom of expression and doing others. So already we're a convening agency, and we're there as a standard setter. So it's always very important to have them in the room and have them listening to different perspectives. But to answer your question, one of the key ways that UNESCO's work has been with our partners. So whether you're working with NGOs, with associations, UNESCO has a wide network of chairs at different universities. So I would really encourage you to look around. So if your high schools are too controlled environment that you're not able to go in there, and if your museum is public and you're not able to do it there, then maybe there's through other partnerships that you are able to do it. And museum programming doesn't need to be within the four walls. I was always inspired when they opened up the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. I think I heard the first director say that it was 9 years they were trying to fundraise. And during that time, they were going to community centers and libraries and city halls, and they were already starting all their community consultations to have the museum outreach, and the museum education was completely active before the museum even had a physical space. So there are so many ways to have your education and outreach go outside of walls that might be too conservative, and to find spaces where there is freedom of artistic expression, even if it's an outside space. So we were really surprised at we have a fund for cultural diversity, and I'm always surprised to see sometimes some of the NGOs and others are able to submit and get submitted through their UNESCO National Commission quite avant-garde proposals that are giving youth voices and using the cultural and creative industries for their expressions in countries that I'm often surprised to say, wow, this got submitted and we're able to fund it and really make change on the ground. So my advice would just be look around for other partners who can help make it happen.
Thanks, Karalyn. The director of the National Museum of African History and Culture that Karalyn mentioned, Dr. Lonnie Bunch, he was the opening speaker. We had a 1-hour conversation in Philadelphia. It's on the website if you want to listen to him, on the Inclusive Museum website, so go for it. It's brilliant. Okay, next question, please.
Thank you very much. I'll just start, for the issue of Gaza, for instance, now, many hours to get silenced. And in our own country, all countries, these are wonderful aspirational policies that can you point to actual this, like, how is it that they can actually protect artists?
Yeah,
How can we have news things, policy, formulations to actually protect them from these things?
it's not always easy, and sometimes it has to be outside their country. I think we all look at the artist Weiwei, who's, you know, such a poster child for that. The example that I gave from the Biennale de Venise, I thought was really inspiring because we were able to just use our office. So it wasn't part of the official Biennale de Venise, but we have a UNESCO office there right at St. Mark's Plaza, and we transformed it into a pavilion during the Biennale. We opened the night before the Biennale opened. We commissioned 17 artists from conflict areas to create original works and to come and speak about it. And it was a wonderful opportunity to raise a lot of political awareness and media awareness about the vulnerability of artists in conflict times. We also went to the United Nations. We partnered with PEN International and PEN America, and we brought writers and artists from Afghanistan, from Ethiopia, from various conflict zones, including Dia Khan, whose quote I read. She's so eloquent about, the way she said it in New York was, dictators know the power of art. And that's why they suppress artists and cultural professionals. But when we were there, together with the UN Special Advisor on Cultural Rights, they called on the UN member states. And we had, in addition to UN delegates, we had a lot of civil society in the room. And she called on a specific UN resolution to protect artists and cultural professionals in times of conflict. So, I mean, this is a goal that we're working towards. More and more at UNESCO, we are being called upon as soon as there's a crisis to have intersectoral exchanges on how we can support. We are already working on a lot of us towards what we can do right now. Of course, in Gaza, it's not accessible, but we are already in the planning stages. But aside from that, during the height of, not that I could say the height, but the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, we brought 40 artists and cultural professionals into residency programs in Europe to try to help them continue their livelihoods despite the situation. When they were able to return, we organized, in collaboration with museums and cultural centers, residencies in the country. The neighboring countries are also very, very important. We've had a lot of discussions with Poland, for example, and how they could support. In Sudan, this totally overlooked crisis in Sudan, we've been working with our office there and with colleagues in our Cairo office. We are creating culture hubs away from Khartoum and Port Sudan and other places where artists can flee to try to maintain some sort of continuation of their livelihoods in conflict zones. We also work in post-conflict countries like Yemen, trying to get their youth trained. In my work at UNESCO, I think one of the biggest challenges is the fact that youth have very little training opportunities. We're very fortunate in countries where arts and culture education are offered in the schools. So, and we've been working as we can in Afghanistan to help musicians and other performers. So we do what we can, but I would just say to you that it's something that is becoming a big, big priority. That's why I mentioned at the Monteil conference next September, when all the ministers of culture from around the world will be there. Protecting artists in emergencies will be one of the key things addressed.
Thank you, Karalyn. Next question, please. No questions? All right.
Hello, good morning. I'm not sure the language my question is a bit different in nature because I'm coming from Brussels, so I'm speaking from a Western European background. But I wonder how this advocacy and activism can be when it becomes institutionalized in museums, and how museums can deal, how disruptive can advocacy be institutionalized. Yeah, this is my question.
So I'm not sure if I'm the best place to say that, and I think it's gonna be through, your interaction with the museum director of that, but already just presenting diverse perspectives, not offering one narrative. Letting, people understand that there's different narratives in interpretation. So already just expanding your, education outreach, but your interpretation, so that it's not, that it's inclusive of the people who created it, and that, you offer multiple viewpoints. I think is one of the reasons, but how are you gonna go up against, you know, an institution that won't let you present different art from different areas or different perspectives? I think it's all a question of, you know, your partnerships and kind of using your soft power. So whether it be organizing a conference where maybe you can bring in voices that you're not able to say from your institutional voice, but that can be said from the person invited, and just giving opportunities to have exposure to these perspectives. I'm not sure if that's helpful, if that answered that. Okay.
Anyone else? One last question, anyone? I think it's, you know, we started off with wonderful reflection, very bold, very honest, with Jonathan Fine, and now we have Karalyn, who illustrated how their standard setting instruments will enable the mainstreaming of what we want to do. Now, the 2005 convention, you know, I was involved in the very early stages, the drafting of the convention. It was artists and civil society actors who played a very important role, and museums can play a very important role. I'm not saying that they don't, but they could do better than what they do now. And there are standards there, just like we always refer to the ICON definition of a museum, ICON code of ethics. So those are soft law instruments, and the UNESCO convention that Karalyn is talking about is what we call hard law instruments. They are treaties. 2005 convention is a treaty. So please, you know, if you have any questions, you can also ask online, make your comments and so on. With that, would you join me in thanking Karalyn for wonderful.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to jump in with practicalities. So we are finished here at this wonderful museum, and we're moving together to the museum portrait. It's a short walk. There is a map that's in your program, but we're going to do this together. So Tamsin and Tatiana, they will lead the group.
Oh no, Tatiana's already gone.
Tatiana's gone. Okay, keep going. Tamsin is going to lead, and I'm going to follow. But it's directly opposite us. There's a map here if you get lost, and we start at 12 o'clock. So, okay.